Hi everyone, it's Jen again. Hope you had a good week. Today I thought I would go ahead and talk about my process for making my combat system as a non-programmer. And I thought it would be more helpful to talk about my thought process and my approach than posting my code, because what I create is so very specific to what I am making with my story and my world and everything, and my my programming is not anything anybody should really be copying anyway. So I'm sure if you wanted to just find here's a insert battle system for your game, there are other resources out there that would be way better than what I could provide. And I also want to just preface that I am approaching this from someone with an art background who has training in animation and graphic novels. So a lot of my approach is just looking at a large problem that has a lot of different pieces and breaking it down into manageable tasks that I just chip away at on a consistent basis and eventually come to what would be a final product. When I was approaching my game, my battle system, it wasn't really so much that I went into it thinking I really need to blend card mechanics with a combat system, with a visual novel and renpy. It was more I was looking for a way to incorporate what I consider reactive problem solving, as opposed to having just an executable, repeatable strategy, which I find is prevalent in most turn-based RPGs, where you just kind of have a set strategy that you sort of follow that to win. There's a prescription. Usually it's some type of power creep, just a stat check where you grind so much experience and you learn so many abilities, or you gather so much equipment, and then if you meet the threshold for the numbers that you need to have, then you can pass through the gate to the next level, which is fine. But since I was planning on making a combat system from scratch, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to capture that sense of having to kind of react. So that's where the memory randomized cards kind of come into play, is that there are definitely optimal strategies and card combinations in the game that I've created, but you have to adapt to what you've got. So you can't always rely on just using suffuse, which is the discord buff, and then using fury, because you might have a round where you don't have any fury cards or you don't have any suffuse cards. So there's got to be some flexibility in your approach to buffing and debuffing, and you have to pay attention to what buffs and debuffs you have available to you to use the corresponding attack cards that would complement that, so that you can penetrate the player's defense. With that all said, how can I create this level of flexibility and I guess complexity to the strategy with as little as possible, because I want to make this as simple as I can. And I achieved that, I think, by trying to have as few stats as I possibly could. So just having 3 elements to have that kind of wheel of rock, paper, scissors, without any extras. No need to have all the earth, wind, fire, light, dark element, all that kind of stuff. We were just going to stick to 3. Having both your defense and your offense in one stat. Yeah, I ended up going with corporeal and astral being 2 different types, instead of just going with just one attack stat. Just having that 50-50% of having to worry about, both from the investment as far as building your character, and for worrying about the enemies stats, was a pretty good balance, I think. So yeah, starting with a minimal amount of stats, and then what it kind of breaks down to in my mind, when you're programming it, is just everything is very basic. I'm talking about baby programming, because I am, again, not a programmer. So I think of everything in I think everything as far as my toolbox for creating the system was just variables, which eventually kind of evolved into using object classes, conditionals, F statements, get attribute, set attribute, and random. That's where my targeted learning kind of went to, was just again, object classes, conditionals, F statements, get attribute, set attribute, random, and I guess lists, dictionaries, arrays are in there somewhere too. You would use to kind of help you control whatever elements that you need to randomize from. At least that's how I use it. So when I'm breaking down my card mechanic, how I want to create that, I want to have a way that the player has a certain number of cards and card types, and then from these cards there will be some random cards that will be picked, and they will be placed face down, I guess, on a board that the player will then choose to flip them over and reveal which cards they are. So using the bread and butter that I talked about earlier, how would I do that? Start breaking it down into small, manageable little parts. So I think, okay, well, I'm gonna have a set number of cards on the table, so I'm gonna make objects for each one of those cards to be kind of a placeholder, a container, and they're going to have a set position on the screen. So we have the cards. They have their own card properties, the cards themselves, so cards contain, punish, these cards that would be essentially your attacks and your support abilities that the player could choose to use. And then you have your card holding position on the board, which was slot 1, 2, 3, 4. You get the idea. And so then I have a list where I have the player's owned cards, which cards they have available to get randomized to be put in those slots. So put those in a list. We have four Fury cards, we have 2 contained cards, etc. And then we do a get random from the list to populate each one of the slots at the beginning of the battle. Maybe slot 1 would get assigned with contain, slot 2 would get have Fury, etc. And then these get removed from the list as they get taken up by the slots, so that we don't have 10 Fury cards out there or something. When the player has their turn, and it's it's a call screen, they can select one of those image button cards, and once it is flipped, that is an if conditional, right? So we've changed the state of the card slot to flipped, and then we have a F statement that says, okay, let's get the attribute of the card that's been assigned to slot 1. And in this case, it was the name of that card. So if slot 1 was contain, and we get the attribute of the name of that card, and then we use that name in an F statement because we've named our images the same. So I have contain dot webp for the image of showing the contain card when it's flipped face up. And so then that if statement is okay, if the card is flipped, then we show the F statement of the get attribute of slot 1, which in this case slot 1, which in this case was contain, and so contain.png is shown. So I would basically have it that a conditional, because every time the player would interact with the screen, it would go back to this loop where it was okay, if flipped 1 equals false, then we're just gonna keep displaying, we're just gonna bring up that call screen again of the flipping phase. And then if flipped 4 is true, then it's gonna change screens. It's gonna switch over to the select phase where the player is, when the player clicks on one of the cards, it has to be a flipped card. The card slot has to be flipped in order for it to be an image button. So I have conditional, the conditional screen has changed, even though aesthetically it looks the same, to now if the card is not flipped, then it's not an image button anymore. They can't interact with unflipped cards anymore. It's just showing like the back of a card. That's just a image, not an image button. The only image buttons are conditional if that card is flipped. And if that card is flipped and if it's not selected, then they can choose to select it. And then it has a similar function as what happened with the flipping phase, except for now the state that is changing is selected. And so it's going to get the name of the selected, the card that's assigned to that selected slot, and it's going to run a function that's like basically named after that same card. I know that's kind of like sounds like a lot, but really again, it's just those very simple like 5 principles that we're using. Let me go over it one more time. Object classes, conditionals, F statements, get, attribute, and random. I don't know if that makes things sound like harder or if it makes it sound easier. I feel like that's like the main hurdle for like doing any of these like big projects. It's just like when you see it in its entirety, it's like this giant complex thing with all these like moving parts. It's like, I don't know, opening up a clock and like seeing all the gears and like being overwhelmed with like, how would I replicate this? Versus like if you just, you know, I guess started, if you were able to like craft a gear and just started like from each individual piece, constructing it in a way that like makes sense to you, and just like kind of balancing each little piece and just like tinkering with it. I find that process to be a lot more fun and rewarding and manageable than like trying to follow a tutorial and look at somebody else's like clock that they've made versus just kind of like building it from like little tiny pieces on my own. And I guess that's what I would encourage. The reason why I'm making this video is I would encourage other non-programmers to maybe like adopt that mindset of like being able to just wrap your mind around some very basic bread and butter, and just work with those elements till you get comfortable with them, and then gradually start introducing other concepts as you just become more comfortable and more confident in what you're doing, and you have like a better understanding, rather than like trying to jump in to somebody else's code. They have like a bunch of like functions that you don't understand and just kind of like crossing your fingers and hoping that it works. Certain other things, like I definitely have to go to documentation for, especially when it's like renpy specific, like screen language. I have to fight through documentation to get things to display the way I want, and to interact the way I want. And even just something like I wanted the voice lines in the battle to like keep moving even when the player was like clicking. And so trying to find the documentation of where to have that like preference for the voice to continue and not get cut off by like player input clicks, that took me probably, I don't know, longer, more frustration than than my battle system, because again, I had to find like a specific solution online, and I had to kind of like try these different solutions that didn't work because it was probably outdated documentation or something like that. Yeah, having to sift through all that is just kind of another reminder why I find it personally easier to just build my own systems, even if they do seem like kind of a complicated like monster by the end of like what I'm making to other people. It makes sense to me, and yeah, I think that's you know, if it works and it makes sense to me and I can build upon it, I think that's good. I gradually get better at adding little more tools to my toolbox that I feel like improve my games and my programming as I go along. But it's a slow process, the span of like the 5 years that I've been doing this, and I look forward to learning more and improving my systems as I go forward. With that said, here is what I've been working on this week with the sprites, tech animations, support animations, some voice lines, some sound effects, and yeah, this is all stuff that I don't even really think twice about like programming, because it's something that I've become comfortable with, along with like my animation training. I feel like pretty confident and comfortable with the key poses that I work on and stuff. So it's just one of those things that you just have to break down into individual tasks. Like today I'm going to work on the idle animation. Tomorrow I'm going to work on the attack 1 animation, attack 2 animation, that sort of thing. And that's how I kind of approach just everything from coding to art assets to scripting. Just break it down into these manageable, digestible little parts that I just pick away at every day.
Wow, they do just keep getting uglier. You called? Here you go, sweetheart. Let's get out of here. Chins up. We got a lively one incoming. You called? Aw, thinking of me? Aw, thinking of me? They don't use it all at once. All in a day's work, Agent. And here we go again. You called? Where would you be without me? Well, that was crazy. Time to strut your stuff, Agent. Only for my favorite Esper. My turn already, huh?